Welcome to Mistakes Were Made, a podcast about non-monogamy for messy people like us. I'm Sarah. I'm a queer, non-monogamous therapist, parent, and writer.
And I'm her husband and co-host, Alex. And today our guest is Dean Spade, who is a writer, activist, and advocate for queer and trans liberation based in racial and economic justice. Dean is a professor at the Seattle University School of Law, and we're here to talk about Dean's new book, Love in a Fucked Up World. Available now everywhere where books are sold by people who aren't dicks.
Good point.
Welcome to Mistakes Were Made, Dean.
Thank you for having me. I think you all have a really excellent podcast title.
Oh, thank you.
It's so true.
I think you've got a really great book title.
Thank you.
It's also so true.
We're keeping it frank with both of them.
Yeah, and light.
The book is fantastic. I have already bought it for a ton of people that I'm dating, and a lot of my clients, I've given it out to someone just today. It has so many of the themes and concepts and conflicts that we've touched on in this podcast over the years. And I feel like they're articulated and organized in the book in this way that's just like so accessible and useful, and feels particularly relevant and important in this political moment. So I'm really excited to have you here to talk about it.
Thank you for reading. I really appreciate it.
I'm wondering, who did you have in mind as your audience when you wrote this book, and why now?
Well, I mean, I've been writing this book for 10 years. I'll be honest. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. I've written other books while I've been writing this book. It's very, this has really been a labor of love, and also like a lot of insecurity and uncertainty about whether I should write this book and can I put this book out? And, I've edited it more than anything. So the timing is not really based on anything except for that's how long it took. But also like everyone keeps being like, wow, you just got the timing right. And I'm just like, well, things have just been getting worse and worse. So any time would have been maybe okay.
Not going to go broke betting on a fucked up world.
Yeah, pretty much has been happening. But my audience, I think I have a few audiences in mind. Like on the one hand, so actually this was part of a bigger project that was like a self-help book for, radicals that had other concepts in it as well. And I had to break it up into multiple books because it got too long. So I was like, well, obviously I'll put out the sex one first because people like sex. You know what I mean? That was kind of the idea. So part of it is like, I tried to write it really, really, really accessibly, even more so. That's already a value in my work, but even more so, hoping that young people would be interested in it. People who are not totally into reading could still skim it or use charts or, ideas that are in there that are lists. I hope that some people will come to it because they're like awakening about oppression and domination through their own experiences of themselves. Like a lot of my awakening was around feminism and sex and things like that when I was a teenager. I also think that the book is useful for people who've been in movements for a long time and are like, wow, things just keep blowing up, I also think maybe just like anybody who's kind of having some suffering in their sex, love, friendship realms, which is most people could use it. Like a friend recently asked me, I want to give this to people who are like not at all related to the movements. Do you mind? I think they like it. And I'm like, give it to anyone you really want. And of course, like I think that there's some stuff in there that isn't. I tried to put these ideas about how we relate and what's hard in a political context that I think is vital for understanding them and healing. But I think you could not be totally bought in on that and still get something out of that,
And just this idea that there are certain types of dynamics that you will feel get repeated in your own relationships or inside communities sort of over and over again. And one of the things I just like really appreciated about your book was this idea of universalizing that and being like, this is a common frustration. And lots of people feel like you keep having the same relationship and you don't know why. And connecting that to political systems that we're all living inside of at the same time. Just was really refreshing.
I'm hoping that like when we name patterns, and this is what, the rest of the self-help literature also names patterns, right? Like naming patterns can be like, oh, it's not just me, I'm not bad. It's not you, you're not bad. But I think naming them and then putting them in a political framework, because most of the self-help literature like just makes it as if we're a bunch of individuals and we're fucked up, and
Fix
it's like,
yourself.
And it's a self-improvement project. There's kind of some shame and blame that can be in there, and then you still have the problem. And why aren't I happy yet? Instead of like, wow, everybody is terrified and miserable and numbed out, struggling with these patterns. They're tearing up people's friend circles and families and communities over and over again. And if we could name some of them, even though we don't experience them identically, we might be affected by it happening in someone else's life right next door, like, in our life. Like maybe there's some like reduced shame and just like, oh, of course this is happening. Like, I'm not bad, you're not bad. Let's like, what would help,
And that we don't live in a culture that is encouraging us to or modeling positive, healthy relationships. and staying in relationships through conflict, and the idea of, really being able to change together, both, in one-on-one relationships and collectively.
Yeah, and accept accountability and responsibility for your own behavior, but also one of my favorite things. There were a few times reading the book that I laughed out loud, and I think the first one was when you said at some point, "No one familiar with my dating history would accuse me of having it all figured out."
Yeah,
True. It's really nice to hear that kind of vulnerability and just be I think often self-help books, will be positioned from I'm an expert, I do everything perfectly. And we've had some great guests in the past. I'm thinking of Eric Fitzmedred too, who talked about his own struggles with cheating and people. I think that's what really helps people, right? Is when you can be a little vulnerable.
People often say to me, they're really surprised that I struggle with jealousy. Because they think I've got something figured out, and I'm just this whole book is about the really hard feelings, whatever they are going to come. They're going to come again and again. If we're doing things that are alive, we're going to get activated. If we do things we care about, if we connect people in a way that's interesting to us, inevitably we will get activated. And it's not, can I not get activated? It's, can I be with myself when I do? Can I, to some degree, stick to how I want to treat people, even when I'm telling a wild story about them or myself in my head? Can I support a dear friend or lover when they're activated and not be full of blame and shaming them for having a strong feeling, but also not join their revenge fantasy or whatever? It's just that, it's not, and so I feel it doesn't help when we act some people never feel possessive or never feel jealous or never feel, lack of belonging or anger or whatever. Just when we make certain feelings bad, it's just so harmful.
Yeah.
I think as a therapist who works with lots of folks who are non-monogamous and polyamorous, that is one of the more challenging perspectives to dismantle, that polyamory and non-monogamy are not a utopian promise of relationships that are no longer hard or eradicating feelings that are difficult or we might feel ashamed of, like jealousy, like possessiveness, like insecurity. And I think sometimes inside polyamorous communities, it can actually have the effect of discouraging people from being open about those challenging feelings because they've become taboo in this other type of way.
Right. It means you're not fully developed. I mean, I think this is really it. It's one of the things that I wrote in the book that several people commented on is I wrote in the book that there's monogamous or non-monogamous relationships are not politically better. You can be a dick to anybody in any kind of relationship, and people are, and just getting out of the idea that there is a utopic space. It's I do think it's interesting what Jessica Fern says in Polywise.
Yeah.
She says that thing about how at least for some people, being in open relationships may kind of push you into differentiation a bit because you have to acknowledge another person's separateness to some degree if they're having these other connections. Of course, I'm sure there's ways people find weird workarounds where it doesn't happen, but I do think it's an interesting thing. Maybe it requires something part of the reason I was interested in opening my relationship was that I was I just don't believe personally that I want to rely for security on controlling someone else's sexual behavior. It just feels like a lie. Yeah. I don't want my life to be based on a lie. So whether or not whoever I'm with is having sex with other people or not, or I don't want to believe that them not having sex with others is making me secure. And also, if I'm monogamous or non-monogamous, that's already not true.
Right.
Nothing is going to guarantee that no one's ever going to be attracted to other people, have sex with other people, leave me, that I won't leave them. Everything's changing all the time, but there's kind of a desire for security that I think this is related to a lot of the stuff in the book about how people often unconsciously escalate relationships looking for security, don't even know that we're kind of forcing a relationship into a new status or a new set of behaviors just because we want to tend to the insecurity that desire just does bring up. That's actually quite interesting. I don't know how I got here.
Yeah. Well, could you go back to you use the term differentiation, and I found that to be one of the really useful kind of new concepts for me, I think, in the book. Can you just talk a little bit about what that means and how it kind of, where it usually lives in the arc of a typical relationship or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you what I understand of it. Obviously, there's a lot about this in different sort of self-help literatures. But the way I understand it is that a lot of times we have an early stage of a relationship where we do a kind of bonding that can be pretty like mushy and meldy, and people literally do things that you do with infants, like lots of prolonged eye contact, like pleasure in each other's every detail of their body. And in this, we're in like kind of a chemical haze often in this period. It's very pleasurable. It's kind of a new relationship energy thing. And a lot of times in this phase, we're unconsciously imagining that this is the place we're finally going to get a love we didn't get from our early caregivers. So, then that just varies. So if I was neglected, I'm going to get a lot of attention. Or if there was too much intervention, this is the place where I'll be free and allowed to be loved for all the dimensions of me or whatever. We're unconsciously imagining this person is like it. And we are sort of seeing them through a lens of kind of unconsciously dismissing the things that are not signs of this and favoring the things that are, and we're also showing the best parts of ourselves to each other. And it's very lovely. It's not dishonest or deceptive, but it does lead to some like a little bit ungrounded projections usually. And then you get to a moment where for some people, it's when you feel like you've landed them in some way, which could really vary. Like I'm calling them my boyfriend, or we're engaged, or we're living together, whatever. People really vary in kind of what their cultural norms are for that. But for some, or we've decided to be monogamous or whatever. And in that moment, sometimes people start to have a shift where you realize they're not going to meet those unconscious projections. And there's some level of disappointment. I got sick and you didn't care for me quite the way I wanted. Or you actually started spending more time with your friends again, which you weren't when we were in our earliest phases. Or you had to go catch up on everything at work that you were leaving behind when we were in our earliest phases or whatever. And it's not what I most hoped. And now I have to really acknowledge, ideally, that you are a separate person on a life path and that you have things to do and that you might sometimes have different views or needs or obligations than me. Or, and Jessica Fern describes this well, we can both try to force it to stay in the first phase. We can both try to be like mad at each other for being different. I can try to pressure you to have your life be smaller and not go spend time with your friends or not go to graduate school or not whatever, pursue your interests. Like we can resent each other for every difference and every rub. Or we can differentiate enough to be like, who really are you now that we're through this particular moment of projection? Can I feel the ways in which you can't meet my every need, but still appreciate the parts where we overlap and also figure out where else I want to get fed in my life? One thing I'll say, this I'm getting from a book that has like really one of the most horrid titles for me. Passionate Marriage. This it's a self-help book that really helped me a lot. Yikes. But in my friend circle we call it PM because I'm really anti-marriage, so it's just like that's a really hard one to read a book called that. But anyway, in that book, the author, I read this 20 years ago, but that book, the author talks about how in families there's often a shared level of differentiation. So you may be the sibling who had to go and you got out and you moved all the way across the country and almost never talked to the parents, and I lived with them. We're actually equally differentiated or undifferentiated with our parents, right? We're both it's a really stuck area. You know what I mean? Where there's kind of an extreme reaction in one direction or the other. And that oftentimes we choose lovers, and I think maybe this might be true with best friends as well, who are similarly differentiated or undifferentiated, that would have more or less of that skill that we have. And that it's easy to blame the other person, that person's messed up, or well, I'm messed up and they're perfect. But actually it's a dance, and both people are sort of on a similar level and have a chance to work out some of that together.
And I think this is where some of these themes around differentiation and collectively moving through things and patterns, I loved the way you talked about it, because we do choose dynamics and people that mirror some need or unmet need, often from our families of origin. And that'll show up in a workplace, that'll show up with a lover, that'll show up with a best friend. And the instinct there is actually, I think it's good. I think that's an instinct for healing and understanding. I think that's people looking to have a different outcome.
Yeah, to return to the scene of the crime and be like,
yes.
What else? But it can feel really dysfunctional when it's happening. For example, I love an alcoholic. You know what I mean? Because my primary connection in my childhood was with an alcoholic. So I'm I'm often drawn to that. It's so deeply familiar. Or another way that I once had talked with a therapist about it was there was a kind of level of stress and tension and vigilance in my childhood that I would find dates where I felt that again. And that's what felt like real love.
That was your first attachment. Your first nervous system imprinting happened in that way. Yeah. And so you will be called back to it again and again. And I think about this a lot with my clients and myself, that we won't eradicate these patterns or transcend them, we will just continue to understand them and like sort of circle back to them with more and more understanding. And I think sometimes the possibility like to transmute them.
Yeah.
But they are who we are.
Yeah. And also they're like, I mean, my hope for it, and I tried to talk about this in the book, because the self-help literature can have these huge promises and people think they're going to like, have whatever wealth and fame and the perfect body and the perfect wedding in 30 days or less, or whatever. And really it's just like, my goal is just like, when I get really activated, can I know what's happening? Can I do a little bit less of the hard stuff to myself or others that I sometimes do with it? Could I ask for help? Did it not last as long this time? Did I lose like one less night of sleep than I lost when I got activated this last time? Or I mean, and then the next level for me is like, can I choose like an alcoholic who's in recovery? Like, could I take what I'm attracted to about this person's shaping and find someone who's also done some work on their side of the shaping? I've done some work on my side. And could we have a more conscious experience of this dynamic instead of just like banging up against each other in the classic way,
Yeah. And that the promise of the permanent idealized love. I was just thinking about how powerfully that intersects with capitalism, right? And just like this unattainable thing that we are so like deeply conditioned to believe in, and that keeps us kind of on the hook all the time.
And it's like the feeling of when you first made a purchase or something like that, right? Like you're fulfilled, and then like, 3 days later, the TV is not that exciting anymore or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think also it's the nation state. Like the idea, like the United States wants us to believe that it is forever, and it wants us to shape our lives as a mirror to that foreverness. And so like, that's why we have to marry and like be recognized by the government. Like it's like a whole dynamic that's like stories about forever. Where in reality, we live in a constantly changing world where everything is incredibly unstable, gender, race, all of these categories, governments, money, there's like all these fictions we live under that are unstable because they're trying to organize the feral, wild world. And we are like, we're made so insecure. And we're like, if I just buy this, I'll be happy. If I just get this body, I'll be happy. If I just get this relationship, I'll be happy. If I just get this guy to call me back, I'll be happy. It can even come down to the moment to moment,
And that need to keep us dependent, vigilant, isolated, that really breeds the kind of insecurity that I think shows up, to use a word, kind of pathologically in relationships, and can feel immovable and like this must just be what love is and what love feels like.
So like on the one hand, there's the sense that like we're trying to get safety out of those things, right? Maybe that's like one way to describe the sort of yearn for the permanence of a perfect relationship or something. But it sounds like part of what you're saying with the differentiation concept is like, that's a healthy thing to do, to move through and pass to the point where it kind of gets hard. And like, maybe that's kind of where the real relationship starts, or like the safe relationship maybe starts once you've actually done that, not when you're in the... I
love this question because earlier this book is a book about prison abolition and police abolition and where is safety and where are we told we can get it from the outside, right? And so the real question for me is like, what actually makes us safe? Solidarity, robust support systems, so that if I just lose you or I just lose you, it's not over for me. I want to have a lot of friends who visit me in the hospital. I want to have a lot of friends who I can call if I get arrested, right? Like safety comes from being in dense, complex webs of lots of kinds of relationships. And our society tells you to isolate yourself in a marital relationship and then buy a lot of stuff and then feel actually terrible and dead in that relationship and full of resentment and control each other. Then they have us exactly where they want us, right? So to me, this question about like the other thing is like self-generated safety. Like what we also live in a society where we're told that the way to feel power is to declare yourself a victim and to seek redress from someone on the outside. So like call the cops, call the principal, call the parent. We're all very disempowered and like institutionalized. Like safety is elsewhere. It's in a border. It's in a military. It's in posting on the internet about what you did wrong for me and having the whole internet see that I'm right. There's all these moves that are very disorganizing of our communities that come from safety being outside. And if I'm a little bit more like, I don't think things are safe right here, I'm going to organize other students on my campus to give each other rides. I don't think it's safe around here. We're going to start visiting all the elders. I don't think it's safe around here. We're going to talk on our blog about what's going on with guns. Like if we actually self-generate safety collectively, and I don't think I'm necessarily going to be safe, I'm going to tell a friend before I take this LSD. Like literally just the more responsibility we take for our safety with one another in a very unsafe world, like that's actually where safety comes from. Whereas seeking it in these dead ends, like if I had a more militarized border, if there were more cops on the streets, if I had the right boyfriend, this is not going to work.
If I could just like hold on to this one person and believe in the primacy of our love and the idea that I am the most important person to them and control and protect that at all costs.
If I could get you to not have sex with anybody else,
yeah,
I could feel that is not going to work, right? Because then even if you obey my command, I'll always be like, is the person looking? Did they just look at you?
And the vigilance that requires, which just breeds more and more of a sense of that kind of dependence and kind of codependence that you're talking about. I was wondering if we could come back to the concept of jealousy for just a moment, because I always appreciate it when people will come on the podcast and be open about their struggles with it, because I also struggle with it, and I always have. And I know, like, in the book, you've talked about how jealousy and exclusivity and control are all aligned with the kind of cultural policing that you describe. But will you just tell us, like, personally about your experience with it and where you're at with it now and where you've been?
Yeah. Great question. I mean, I just really know that feeling. It has... one of the questions I have, I mean, you probably are more studied on this as someone who like does mental health for a living, but I'm interested in like, I feel like there's different qualities of jealousy. Like, I feel like I have like very early childhood jealousy, like pre-verbal trauma jealousy. And that's where I've tried to focus like a lot of my healing work around it. Like a lot of my friends have jealousy where they're like thinking a lot about their lover's new date and what they look like and whether they're cool or pretty or whatever. I don't think at all about the new date. It's all for me about like there's like this feeling, if it comes on, which it doesn't in all connections, and there's real complexity about why it comes on so strongly and sometimes not others, of total loss, devastation, that I think is like it's just like a pre-verbal level of infancy feeling. So one of the things when I first opened my longest relationship, I'd been in open relationships before that, but then we had a monogamous relationship for like 11 years. And when we opened it up and kind of I was doing exploration and therapy about how I wanted to manage this feeling, one thing we realized was like, it's better not to talk. It's better to this feeling is just best held with like physical contact. That was really helpful to be like, stop talking. I'm a real chatty person over here. And like, I'm just going to get myself in trouble. I'm going to ask questions I don't want the answers to, or I'm going to try to figure something out. And actually none of this is in the realm of the verbal. This is much better dealt with through that. I've also found like it can be really dealt with well through like kink, through like just like anything that's more in the symbolic realm or like
somatic, embodied.
Getting me out of words. And then some other things I've used to deal with it. Good.
No, sorry. So you're saying it's not about comparison as much as it is about sort of like the core sense of like abandonment.
Yes. Like some kind of very fundamental safety. Something I found helpful is like, I talk in the book a bit about like MAD maps, which are a tool I got from the Icarus Project, now known as Fireweed Collective, where it's like you like are aware of a strong state that you go to, and you're like, when you're not in the state, you make a map of what it's like. Like, what do I need when I'm in it? What kinds of things? Like, what kinds of songs should I not listen to? What kinds of people should I not call? Are there things I want to tell people ahead of time when I'm going through this? Please do this. Like, I like made a manual for one of my lovers, so I had a lot of jealousy. I'm like, please say these things to me. Don't say these things. And they're not the things he would have thought of because he's, the opposite person in some ways. You know what I mean? Of course. So he's going to, of course, say the exact right. He's like, let me just give you more space and leave you alone for a while without help. That's not what I need to hear, that, whatever. But I also found it really useful to just like, I need to remind myself why I'm doing this. For the sake of what? I have to go back to my purpose. Wow, I'm really uncomfortable right now. Jealousy tells me it's never going to end and that it's intolerable and I must change something. The reality is it does end. It comes and goes. And there's really nothing that needs to change. I made the arrangements I made on purpose because they're based on my values and the kind of liberation I want for myself. So it's really helpful to be like, you're scared. You're struggling. Like just to like, first, like not try to get away from it, but just, and neutral, not like it's okay, it's fine. No, just it's happening. Already that brings down the activation. And then if I can, like look at a list I've made of like, why am I doing this? It's so uncomfortable. Why am I doing this? For the sake of what? And I found that to be true. Also of other hard things, I think a lot of people right now are being called on to be courageous and like stand up for their ideas in front of other people. A lot of my students talk about being scared, talk about what they really believe in their other classes and stuff when if the professor they're with disagrees. I'm like, we all got to practice some stuff and be like, for the sake of what? Why am I doing something uncomfortable? Life is not about being comfortable,
right.
And jealousy is so uncomfortable for me.
Yes.
And yet it feels like at my best, I can be like, oh, I'm like fighting for what I want, you know?
So are there some things that aren't worth fighting for?
I think
some hard
so.
things where you don't want to make that step?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
right. Like, yeah, being in shitty relationships with people who violate your boundaries all the time, being like, why am I suffering this much? For the sake of what? Oh, wait, this isn't, this is actually just from an old habit or a belief I have about myself that is,
Right.
no longer accurate. Absolutely. Like doing that
Yeah.
question for the sake of what is so helpful with any suffering. To
Yeah,
me.
and there's that tension between like sort of self-acceptance and being like, this is what I have capacity to do, and wanting to be your kind of like idealized self. I think I struggle with that all the time, like trying to be like, okay, in this moment, like, should I feel regret or feel bad for like not stepping up and advocating for my values or for the difficult feeling that I'm having? Should I like try to transcend that? Am I going to be the better person, or am I just going to accept that I am the person who I am?
Yeah. And also, yeah. And that is one of those, because like sometimes it's like, I'm really uncomfortable. I'm quitting this job. Let's just go. Right. And that's actually right. Like quitting, leaving, boundaries. Yes, sometimes. And other times it's like, I was actually talking about this recently because I've always had a bunch of unpopular political ideas and I've been in a position a lot in my life to share them publicly and have people really disagree. I've been really into prison police abolition for about 25 years. Palestine solidarity and liberation, and I'm Jewish, like anti-Zionist Judaism, like these hard things people do not like, right?
Not comfortable.
Not comfortable. And I've said, I'm huge anti same-sex marriage advocacy while being in that legal realm, right? So like a lot of things that people are like, that I don't like you saying that, you're hurting people like me. How could you possibly say that? And like, it wasn't because it wasn't easy. I would have shame spirals after those talks, and I would stand up for my principle. But I just think maybe people think that when people are doing that, it's easy for them. It's like, no, it was incredibly uncomfortable. And I had to go back to my friends and be like, God, was it okay? The people really didn't like it and they got mad at me. But I think I really believe this, and like check in, like, because no one could hold this kind of discomfort alone. And I think jealousy is like that. Like if we individualize it and are just like, I'm a bad person because I feel this way. Oh my God, my internalized capitalism is so messed up. As opposed to like, this is a common condition. I want more choice and room and liberation in my life, but I'm not bad. I had a friend recently who tried to open a relationship, had a newborn baby, was like, I can't possibly do the emotional work it takes right now. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
That's an okay decision. There's nobody has to do this, and you can be like, what are the conditions under which I could do this? I think that's like a reasonable question.
And to be able to kind of discern between our feelings and our values and when those things are not totally in alignment. And I was just thinking about how the absence of jealousy is not love and security, or love and security is not the absence of jealousy, just like courage is not the absence of fear. Right. It's in fact understanding that those feelings exist inside of it and understanding yourself in relationship to those feelings. And I just was thinking of a Rilke quote that helps me when I'm in a jealous state, which is, no feeling is forever.
Yeah.
And that reminder that I'm having a really difficult feeling and no feeling is forever. And I really like this addition that you're offering. And I have values here. There are values that are really important to me that are not in tune with this feeling right now, but I will be able to get back to them. And I know that
I'm choosing to feel.
Yeah.
I think that's the other piece of it, because sometimes jealousy, I know some people who are like, I couldn't feel jealousy for years and years and years and years and years until I melted enough to feel it. It is a very vulnerable feeling. Some people feel it very easily. There's no one's better or worse. But we are choosing feeling lives and aliveness.
Yeah, any kind of feeling. Like when you were talking about being activated before, like I think there's a pre-stage where you're not like capable of it or don't know that you are.
Yes.
Much less like know how to cope with it when you are, and like think about that. Like I think some people are just like, oh, I never get activated.
I mean,
like, that ain't true.
No.
Do you have a nervous system? Then you're getting activated.
Yeah.
But to your point, I think that I was one of those people who didn't feel jealousy and was out of step or out of contact with fear probably until I was in my mid-30s and I had my kids. And I think that like forced me into a kind of personal and existential crisis and some melting eventually that allowed me to be in touch with those feelings. But I also just equated toughness and confidence and safety and ability with never feeling them, you know? So I think I was really attached to that idea.
Yeah. And there can be like when you feel jealous or when you feel bereft or heartbroken or angry, like, yeah, you can feel so much compassion for everyone else who feels it.
Yeah.
And then when other people are feeling it around you, you can be kinder to them. You know, like these are good things to visit. I think you're so right that when people are activated, often they don't know it. I'm just like telling a story. I'm like, she's so bad. She did this terrible thing to me. Even if I just for a moment know I'm activated, already I'm less likely to do something I'm going to regret. Just like the bottom line of this book is mostly just emotional awareness. You know, that sometimes that's the most we can ask for. I'm not necessarily able to like 100% like change that story about that person is going to fill my mind or whatever. And I even might say something I regret. But if I knew any of it was happening, it might slow it down. I might be able to apologize. I might even not say the thing. But if I just think that's true and I'm completely gripped by it, and I think that's the other thing I noticed, actually, I wonder if you guys know this culturally. So there's that. Then there's the thing where people are like, I've learned to identify my feeling and now everyone else has to do whatever I want. Like, you know what I mean? I found out this makes me feel unsafe and now get in line and never make me feel unsafe. And so like the other thing in the book is like knowing we're in our own feeling and knowing it's our feeling. Other people don't have to do something because we're having a feeling.
There's also an element of, I wrote down perfectionism here. And I think when we're talking about how relationships and our own emotional experiences connect to these oppressive systems, I think perfectionism and white supremacy and capitalism all serve this idea of the perfect relationship, the perfect like emotionally evolved person, the perfect experience of life where you're never activated and you're never afraid. And again, it's like it's very easy for us to get back into a story that's possible,
Right. Well,
even inside radical values, even inside really
we can use our radical values
relationships.
to push that. I mean, that's what people do.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. Up top, you were kind of saying that most of the attention that you've gotten around this book is sort of about the like political elements of it, which was kind of surprising to hear you say that, honestly, because to me, I guess because we have this podcast and we think about relationships a lot, I was like, oh, this is like a relationships book with some political connections, or like it's kind of moving from the like acceptance of different relationship styles and more kind of understanding of what's actually happening inside of them outside of the sort of like monogamous capitalist context. So it's just kind of interesting to think about that transition. And I'm like wondering kind of where you started. Like you started thinking about the book as a relationship book that sort of was based on your personal experience, or maybe that's question's better stated, but like, do you think that, where do you think people should start? Like, I always kind of think if people are accepting of other relationship styles, that might be a gateway to reconceiving like things in the political realm and in the like broader social realm. Do you think about it moving in that direction, or do you think about it moving kind of in the other direction, that like you start thinking about things in the political realm and then you can kind of like move into the personal realm?
I think it's just like there's endless gates in.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of people, and I just, it's so wrapped up, right? It's like every social movement we can think of, they had some kind of program about how they wanted people to live and get housing and food and whatever. And then also had like critiques of beauty myths and like ideas about what sex should be like. And you know what I mean? Like always it's all like it's connected. The personal is political, and even people who pretend that the political is all the public realm, and they still, it's like we still are like, do you compost? Do you ride a bike? Do you like we know that our day-to-day activities are related to the whole bigger structure, and the bigger structure is just made of all of these relationships and people doing stuff, right? And so I think that is connected. For me, I have studied like how social change happens and been involved in all of that, you know, since I was young. That's been a question of mine. And I've also like relentlessly read the self-help literature during that same time because of my own suffering. Right. So, but that was a secret. So like that's part of the time this book was so hard to write, is because I have felt a lot of shame around being involved in a set of literature and tools that are so depoliticized, honestly, like sexist, racist, classist, you know, transphobic, just like messed up, super ableist. So I was always kind of like having this like secret life to some degree. You know, some of my friends knew where I was using all these healing methodologies and reading all these like honestly terrible books that I wouldn't be able to hand to another person because they're so full of bad stuff, in addition to a few wonderful gems that I desperately needed. And I was just like, I want there to be a thing that's for people who believe what I believe. And I don't want you to have to read between the lines so hard. You know, I had a therapist hand me a book where the opening vignette was about how this person was so messed up because he hung out with trans people. You know what I mean? And it's like, that stuff is in all these books. It's all these ideas about what is a healthy, this healthy, that is so normative, so messed up. And so I experienced these interpersonal problems as like manifestations of, you know, the patriarchy and capitalism and all this stuff. And I wanted something that we could relax into, who know that, and also that we could buy into together and get out of the kind of masculinist norms where we're just like, oh, talk about relationships, that's girl stuff. Back to the banner drop, back to the blocking the pipeline. It's like, no, you cannot have effective resistance movements if people are treating each other terribly and blowing up in all these conflicts. And so I'm hoping that there's a lot of ways into this book. Like some people who are just coming to it because they're like, someone told me this is a good book for people who want to be poly, or someone told me this was a good book for teenagers having dating problems, or someone told me this is a good book if the political group you're in is blowing up over a breakup, you know?
Yeah. I mean, one more thing, if you're struggling inside of like the systems that we're all living in, the recognition that is part of the reason that you're struggling, I think can be like a tremendous relief.
Yes.
At least for me, when I feel like, you know, when I have somebody point out like, oh, maybe you feel this way because of the systems around you and like the toxic things in those systems.
It's you.
Like, it's so relieving to be able to be like, oh, it's not just me. And so I'm not uniquely individually accountable for solving that.
I wanted to call the book, It's Not You, It's Everybody, but they wouldn't let me because it's that. Exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
I wanted to come back to some of the taboos I think that exist inside of radical activist culture and spaces about challenges in relationships. And you kind of alluded to this idea that an over-interest in the interpersonal is sort of feminized and sometimes even seen as like counter-revolutionary.
Oh, yeah.
And likewise, I think another piece of that I've encountered personally and in my practice is shame that people with radical politics, people who've devoted their lives to, you know, values of compassion and a better world can have really harmful relationships, can experience abusive dynamics, can experience abuse and abuse. And I wanted to just have you reflect on that a little bit and how you may have experienced that and what you notice about where we are with it now.
Yeah, I think all the things you just said are true. And also there's a kind of idea, which is based in some reality, that like self-care is neoliberal, right? Because there is a huge wellness industry that's like blaming us for our suffering and telling us we just need to drink the next smoothie or have the next, you know, facial treatment or whatever. And so people are appropriately critical of how that individualizes our pain, tells us to manage all the actual harmful things happening under these systems as if there are personal problems. We just need to, you know, have an extra job as a Lyft driver because rents are so high, instead of having a real analysis of, you know, real estate and racial capitalism. That is true. That's what I was afraid of. I imagined all the like very serious intellectuals in my life being like, Dean wrote a, you know, I roll, I'm sure they are. Dean wrote a self-help book, you know. We thought he was a, you know, political, you know, but that there is so much there. And yet here we are, like living our lives through connections to others. And literally we have nothing else.
Right.
Like the other side has all the money and guns. They run the courts. They run the legislatures. They like have that. And all we have is whether we can stick together enough to protect one another, care for one another, and fight back. And we have the fact that all the people on earth are losing from what they're doing, you know? And so if we can't get together people power, we got nothing.
And we can't assume that we'll just know how to do that because we have the right values.
Oh, we're terrible at it.
We're really bad at it. Yeah. And I was thinking, I think it's Emergent Strategies and Adrienne Marie Brown who said small is all because what we do small is what we do big. And I think like that concept is really present in the conversation that we're having, where it's like, the way we treat each other, the interpersonal, the quality of our own relationships with ourselves and with others is how everything else is getting built.
And the fantasy of big big fantasy is like is just about like taking over the state and running the state, and like that, like the idea of doing things that only that scale matters. That scale is the scale of domination. That scale introduced and created racial capitalism. Like, and the only scale we have is the bottom up scale. And where literally it matters, like, do I trust you enough to hide somebody from ICE with you? Do I trust you enough that, you know, you'll guard the door while I do an abortion that's not allowed in this facility? Like, that literally, like, basic trust between people. And we live in the most atomized society in all of time. More people live alone, more people don't have a single friend. Like, people do not have the social skills that are natural to humans, that I believe are like our birthright. They have been stripped from us. We're very de-skilled. Most people I know are like terrified to like have a roommate because they don't want to fight over the dishes. Like, we're so scared of other people. We're so antisocial. And if we like, that's exactly how they want us.
It's interesting that some of those people are also having a lot of sex. And like, just to think about how sex can like be, I guess I was thinking about that because everything you were describing, like those relationships of trust that you need to do all of this stuff. And you said in the book, we need radical emotional and relational promiscuity so that we can survive and resist together. That like intimate, sometimes like sexual relationships can in theory be like ways of building that, or like they mirror the trust that you need to do those revolutionary things.
Yeah.
But they don't by definition.
No, they're also the most likely person to kill you. Like, that's the thing.
Yeah.
The stakes are really, really high, right? Like, these are the worst relationships in our lives. And they're also, like you were saying before, like a place where we go and have incredibly compelling, intense feelings because for various reasons we are seeking healing there and being known there. So that's why it's also really useful to have lots of good relationships where we're not having sex to help support us, since we do act really wild there.
One of the things I loved about that quote about emotional and relationship promiscuity is because it's whether or not you're polyamorous or non-monogamous. In fact, like promiscuity, emotional and
you don't mean
relational,
sexual promiscuity.
Is really any way that you're building those robust systems of care and support that you described. That is already a radical, promiscuous, revolutionary thing to do in a system that would atomize us the way you describe and isolate us the way you describe.
And get away from the exclusivity. Like, one thing I also liked, I think this was in Polysecure, Jessica Verne talks about kind of like, you can have sexual exclusivity in a relationship, but you can also have emotional exclusivity. Like, I don't like, you know, am I allowed to have deep intellectual, political, emotional connections with other people besides my date? And a lot of people are threatened by their partners having deep connection. And that is the worst, when we become so isolated, right? And so, I want people to have promiscuous support systems, a sense of like, if I called my first 5 friends and they couldn't make it to the hospital, there'd be still more people to call. There'd be a deep bench. And most people do not have that right now.
And if we do that small in our relationships, then we can do that big when it comes to those larger steps of resistance and revolt. Then there's, thousands of people to call to interrupt that ICE deportation. If we know how to do that in our lives, we know how to do that in the movement.
I mean, my advertisement in this book is that you can find those friends and lovers in the movement. The best place to make those connections is with people who believe strongly in what you believe in. And a lot of people I know, especially my students I encounter, like they have friends who don't believe in what they believe in. They're their friends from high school, or they're mostly their family members or whatever. And they have these budding radical beliefs and these really deep questions about liberation for themselves and the world. And they don't have anyone to talk to about it, or, you know what I mean? So how deep are those friendships if you're not talking about the things that move you the most? And I think if people would let go of having friends who are so much like them, the same age or same subculture, and instead have friends who believe in what they believe in, it's a much deeper type of connection often, right? And so like, my hope is that people will join movements and have a lot of sex and have a lot of friends. And one thing I will say is I constantly get this question from people. I'm in a group and we're thinking about making a rule that people shouldn't have sex with each other in the group or should have to tell everyone else if they connect that way. And I just want to say on this podcast, please do not make that rule for your group, because it just makes people lie and hide, and it makes their relationships really unsafe. If you're forced to start your relationship with a shameful secret that puts you outside the group, it's unlikely to be good because relationships are hard on people, right? And so then now there's a betrayal of trust either with the group or with your other friends, or your lover can hold something over you. Like, it's just a toxic thing. It's like people don't stop having sex because we ask them to. Instead, groups could talk about what it means like what it feels like to have like ethical ways of having conflict. How are we going to be creating a culture in this group where we can have things get bumpy because they will. Trying to get people not to have sex won't stop that.
Right. Well, and isn't such a prohibition would be predicated on the idea that you would, you're going to like have some dramatic breakup and then it'll cause like that you couldn't transcend that or like heal from that as a group, which it seems like is a thing that we kind of like just sort of broadly accept about all sorts of communities, like whatever ideology they're sort of based in, is just like that if there's some sort of like relationship psychodrama, people are going to be shunned and like never be able to be around each other.
Right.
Isn't that kind of where that's coming
instead
from
of
initially?
being able to be like, we could imagine healthful, loving breakups. I think also there's a feeling that some people have told me, there's like we're worried that if people are dating in the group, they're having like a special connection others don't know about, and it's affecting the group and we don't all know. And it's like, already all of our relationships are here. We're all playing out family roles. We're all having historical memories and projecting on each other. Like, why don't we instead create a culture in the group where we talk openly about like, if we're feeling activated and need support, or, you know, we're give each other direct feedback instead of waiting and blowing up or ghosting. Like, why don't we actually talk about the typical patterns of conflict here instead of putting it all on sex and dating? Because it's like, it happens anyway, even, you know. And there's also this kind of thing of like, let's make our groups act really professional. Like, almost all of our organizing work is going to be unpaid, right? Because if you're getting paid, it's probably by our opponents, right? That's who has the money. And so it's like, our work is unpaid. No, let's not act professional. Let's act deeply social. Let's be interested in belonging. Let's be caring. Like, if we just try to like get as many banner drops out this week as possible and rush each other and act like we're at a job, we're all going to hate each other at the end of the week. And then, you know, or at the end of the year, and then we're not going to get, it's like, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint, you know?
And it's also learning to have tolerance for, not just tolerance for, but interest in the complexity of these relationships. Not that we're trying to figure out how to streamline them or to avoid the kind of conflict that you're describing, but in fact, it's in the complexity, in the conflict, in the stakes of relationships that we're learning how to do what we do. It's not about controlling, sidelining them, or ignoring them.
I talk in the book about going to this Jewish wedding that really had a big impact on me, where the people who were getting married read their Jewish marriage agreement, the ketubah, out loud to the group, which is typical. Some part of that will be read. And the part that they chose to share was about how they wanted to break up. So we're at their wedding, and they're telling us that they want to ethically break. They're telling their whole community, in theory, that they want to ethically break up. Also things about how they wanted to care for each other in dying, and how they wanted to care for each other's children as they entered this marriage. So they went to all the places that people are scared of. And I'm like, what if we did that more in groups? What if in our group, where we're going to like, you know, make food and bring it to the park for unhoused people or whatever we're going to do, we actually talked about how we want to have conflict, what we want to do to repair, how it's okay to make mistakes in public here, how it's okay to give and receive feedback, why that's a sign of valuing each other. You know, none of this stuff is obvious in our culture, you know, how we want to like, when things get really hard, like seek support and not, you know, campaign against one another. Like, what if we like did work to try to build that culture in the group instead of ignoring that until it's happening? Like, most groups only contact me about their conflict. You know, I offer all these workshops for lots of groups, whatever. And most groups are like only when they're about to completely fall apart do I hear from them, because people, of course, don't want to talk about conflict before it's happening. We're in the love phase. We're you know, mesmerized by each other. But it's like, it's coming. If you do anything that matters with anybody else, there will be conflict, and it's not bad. You know?
I think about this all the time in revolution, in non-traditional relationships. The stakes are high, and there's no blueprint. Like, and there's no way that we're engaging in things where the stakes are high, there's no blueprint, and it requires lots of people, where we're running from complexity, from conflict. We're cutting people out when we're uncomfortable, when there's harm, when there's hurt, when we're not what we imagine our best selves to be.
Yeah, that's what's going to come up. Yeah.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
That's literally the point.
And also, unfortunately, there's no other option, because it happens in, you know, groups that are trying to make liberation happen, but it also just happens at everyone's workplace. Like, it's school. There's no getting away from like imperfect people. Like, we're all just imperfect. We're learning. We're brainwashed by a lot of like really shitty ideas. Like, it's just like, this is what it's like. And, you know, I think there's like a way that social media culture, there's a way that works to pretend we're evolved, or that we are, you know what I mean? Like, and just like, can we just kind of let go of that? No one has it figured out. Everyone's out here fumbling along under impossible conditions. Most people are more stressed than ever.
Lots of people are living with a lot of trauma as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, but one big difference is that in those, like at our jobs or other places, there's a compulsion to stay, right? Like, you can't just quit your job willy-nilly, but it is much easier to like leave the mutual aid group because you're pissed at somebody or whatever. So
that's a good point.
It's like I guess that's just like this sort of tricky conundrum, or like maybe an argument that it's even more important to like build the capacity to stay in it, and that like the way that you're in this book, like mapping the kind of like relational things to the political movement stuff, it's like so important to do that because it's so easy to just like leave as soon as things get hard.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think our values are really messed up. I mean, you know, I believe we're in like a dire state of ecological crisis and that all of our lives are changing wildly and that our world might be unrecognizable in 5 to 10 years. So what is more important? Like this shitty job or the group I'm working with that is going to be keeping people alive through the next fire and the next flood and the next storm. Like I really think that we are told to focus on nonsense, you know, or like whether I look pretty today, like all the things
Or
we're just
the
like
faux
focused
permanence of the nation state, like you were describing,
Yes.
or of capitalism, when in fact those things are crumbling before our very eyes.
And and as they crumble, they will have violent spasms. And then I'm busy like hyper criticizing my appearance and hoping that this one person will text me back. Like there's a way in which we're really asked to be distracted, deeply distracted. And that distraction is centered in insecurity, which you were talking about earlier. Yeah.
It reminds me of the thing I was like, okay, I have to talk about this when Dean comes on because it will be inauthentic if I don't, which was the part of the book I had the hardest time with.
Oh, please do tell me. Yeah.
The romance myth. That was the part of the book because I think I went into it with obviously a lot of enthusiasm, and I was just like, I already agree with all of this. And the romance myth was the hardest thing for me. Intellectually, I was like, I know that Dean is right. I know that Dean is right. And it like hurt.
Yeah.
It was like emotionally, I was like, I don't want to believe this. Like I feel like a real loss around it. And I really struggled with it, and I think I still am. So I was going to ask you about it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, that's why I had to learn about this and write it. It's because I mean, from the earliest age, I think I had like my first like really extreme crushes on people when I was like 6 and 7. Like I had some idea from early childhood that the love that I could not find was there in that cultural fantasy. And that, I think a lot of people are living with that. And the romance myth is coercive. So a lot of people are also living with having others put that projection on them and feeling really trapped by it. So there's a whole range of things happening there. But yeah, it's really painful to be like, I can't get the safety, care, permanent happiness, ease that I've been trained to seek in this place there. It's not available anywhere. I am actually a person who's alive and my life is constantly changing and my relationships are constantly changing and nobody can provide this thing permanently to me. And there's not anyone who will read my mind and there's not anyone who will, you know, and like, I can make arrangements with people that are quite secure. And I have lots of friendships and relationships that are quite secure, but not in the way the romance myth imagines, which is that we'll be in like new relationship energy from birth to death in this relationship. And we will like never feel the rub and never feel the losses and just that, yeah, like, it's just like, it's so hard to be like, actually, I'm here with the collective. There's not one person who will solve anything for me.
That's where your pendulum diagram was like the most helpful for me. You know, I kept going back to it where I was like, okay, this is not an all or nothing, because when you were dismantling the romance myth, I was like, Dean, I feel like you're telling me that I will be lonely forever and I will never actually heal and never get what I want. And I'm supposed to just be okay with that. And I was like, that is not what Dean is saying. It's that this is not an all or nothing, right?
Yeah.
That the promise of either totally being seen and accepted and loved and cared for endlessly and permanently by one person is a lie. And so is the fear of complete abandonment and the idea that you alone will be locked out.
That's part of the romance myth too. Right. The romance myth is like, if you don't get this, you'll die alone, right? And so scramble, compete with other people, be unethical to get it, give up everything to get it, run away from all your friends and, you know, change your values, whatever it takes to get this person, you know. So yeah, the truth is somewhere in the middle. We all need a lot of people. All of our relationships, you know, have ups and downs. Many of them, most of them will end in one way or another. And it doesn't mean we're not having profound, intense, beautiful, transformative experiences. And we just don't know what's going to happen. And one of the things I find the most with my friends and myself is like the future tripping in relationships, like especially when you feel quite interested or attached. And it's just like, yeah, we don't know. We literally don't know what's going to happen. What's happening now? I really go back to the like Buddhist equanimity slogan, like, this is how it is now. this is how it is now includes like right now this person's showing signs of interest in me and I'm showing signs of interest in them, or we're having these nice connections. This is how it is now. I'm feeling insecure and wanting to future trip. Both those things are true. That's what's happening right now. Like, can we just like, yes, I wish I knew, I wish I could tell the future. It's nobody can. Wow. Okay. This again,
Right. Well, and I think being susceptible to the idea that somebody can make you supremely safe and guarantee the safety of your future and all of that stuff makes you really susceptible to like fascism.
Yes.
That's what.
And all of this should be played out in kink. That is where we should deal with this. It's okay to want to be completely subsumed in someone. It's okay to want to totally control someone, to want to possess somebody. We can have deeply emotionally satisfying experiences of these drives in spaces of consent instead of what I see, like I think a very typical thing for like straight women is like the fantasy of a dominant man. And like that is like a hot fantasy. Wonderful. It's heavily promoted in our culture. Almost all the romance novels and songs are about it. It's okay to have that in your mind. Don't marry some dude who you have to do all the dishes the rest of your fucking life just because you want to have this hot scene. Have the hot scene. Find somebody who will give you a cute experience of domination, and then maybe that's also the person you want to go to bed with at night. And maybe it's not. And maybe that's the person you want to talk to about everything. Maybe not. But it's like it's the mismatch where we're playing out, or what I see a lot in movements, and I think this might relate to the shame you were describing some of your clients have. Somebody who's really powerful and aligned in a lot of areas of their life. And then in their love and sex relationships, they're choosing something kind of wild and chaotic. There's something they're working out there. It feels really shameful. And maybe it's even dangerous, and their friends maybe are even burnt out of supporting them on it. I've seen many different versions and stages of that. And it's like, that need is okay. But sometimes we're like, going for the hardware store for oranges. We're trying to get like some parts of this from the wrong type of person or place. And the more I can know about the need and actually acknowledge it, the more I might be able to find places to get it met. Like an example I was just using too, that some of it can be platonic. Like I had recently a friend who like came to my house and like went through all my clothes and was like, get rid of all that. It's terrible. And it was like, she was like doing like a, dominating older sister thing. And it was like I gave myself over, and it was lovely. You know what I mean? And it was a wonderful experience of like getting help with this thing that I found kind of stressful. Like we can have those experiences in like safe, wonderful ways, but I'm not actually giving this person total control of my life or marrying them or being dominated all the time,
And they're happening in articulated, consenting containers. Like,
yes.
And I think about this, like to bring it to the big collective, the idea of shadow, which is like, a very psychodynamic idea, and I think about it a lot in my work. We all have shadow. There are all of us have impulses and desires and parts of us that we feel ashamed to explore, or we keep submerged, or we're not sure will be acceptable, or we're frightened of.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I love about kink is the opportunity to build those types of containers where we're like, let's pull something out and let's look at it and let's see what happens there. Because it's not like the goal is for us to create people or movements or a world with no shadow.
Not possible.
It's not what the human
And right now, people's
is.
shadow is having like a rapist, openly racist, because I have had to really struggle with this. People must have a lot of different kinds of erotic desire for Donald Trump. And that is so foul to me. But I think desiring something that's kind of disgusting is actually normal in our society. And there's ways in which I have those desires that I just don't play out there. You know what I mean? And so it's like, can people get more access to shadow play so that we can figure out if it's aligned with what we're doing? It's like, instead of that person where you're like, this person's totally amazing and they're a huge part of the abolitionist movement, and now they're dating a cop. Like, what is going on with that? You know what I mean? That kind of stuff happens.
It does.
And again, no blame, no shame, but just like, can we be... Is there more options can people at least feel they're choosing,
And I think that this is where the kind of puritanical culture that we're a part of comes into play too, where it's like everything is either good or you're bad, right? And then that gives the shadow so much power.
It just makes you more kinky.
It sure does.
People are obsessed with being good,
Yeah.
Yes.
That's playing out sexually.
And if you
for them.
don't deal with it, then instead you have to create like a secret. This is like, I think a lot of cheating and a lot of gambling addiction and just like a lot of other behavior that people are drawn to, because for me, when I do things that are like that, I'm like, I'm proving to myself what I really know. Like, you all think I'm good, but I know that I'm actually really bad and unacceptable. And I'm having this side area where I'm proving that. And that stuff really blows up our social movement spaces and our social circles and our families. Like, we all have been hurt by everyone's like sideways thing. And so it's just like, a lot of this book is just like, can I even know what's going on with me? Can I be like, whatever drives or ideas or thoughts come through my head are actually fine. Like, it's okay. And then be like, what would I like? What do I want in life? How do I move towards it in a way that accepts me as a whole, you know?
Yeah. And this might be specific to me, but I also, when I think about kink, it makes me just think about that it's usually about power, and that you want to have relationships that have, you know, you're never going to like disrupt or like, you know, the power dynamics aren't going to disappear, but you can be playing with the power dynamics in a safe way that acknowledges them, and it like acknowledges your own internal desire to like have it or to give it up. But that's not the definition of your entire relationship. Your whole relationship isn't centered around like trying to exert power over somebody.
Right.
Or
And like,
opposite.
same with our identities, right? They're always going to be in our relationships, our identity differences. And like, the idea, like some simplistic idea that we could just agree to not have them. No, of course, we're going to experience age differences, gender, race, all of these things. And also, it's not the only thing going on. So one of the things that happens in movements a lot is that when we have a disagreement, then I'm like, it's because I'm trans, that you guys both, you know what I mean? And it's like, oh, me being trans might have, you know, is probably part of our relationship. It just is. And also, I'm imagining that you're my dad or what, you know what I mean? Like, and also I'm remembering how I was treated in school, or you all went out for drinks without me and I felt a real belonging wound, or what, you know what I mean? Like, there's so much happening, and there's a kind of a shame about acknowledging any of the emotional pieces that we all bring to it. And so it just becomes weaponizing our identities to talk about it. And it's not actually doing us any favors. But it feels scary to talk about that openly, because then it feels like people are going to dismiss others who bring up real dynamics of identity difference, right? Yeah. So it's like, I feel like there's like this kind of taboo of like how to talk about this. Like, I wouldn't want someone to use what I just said to shut someone else up in a meeting who's trying to talk about racism or sexism or ableism or transphobia, right? And like, we have to, like, we're just so not emotionally sophisticated enough, it feels like right now, to hold the complexity.
And it is, so much of this is about being able to complexify what is happening and to be able to see and care for lots of things at once.
Yeah.
But you can't do that unless you trust the people you're trying to do it with.
I wonder about that. One of the things I wonder about is I think that we have to learn how to get trust fast with strangers sometimes. Like, when you think about like when we're on the street and we're like, our friend's getting arrested and there's a bunch of strangers and we all decide to pull the cops off the person and break the law in that way, or we all decide to light the cop car on fire or whatever, like that, not that I've ever done that, but like that, that kind of thing is like, you know, like what allows people sometimes. And I think that's the self-generated safety thing. That's the like, I know where I stand on. And I think we can actually read that in each other non-verbally sometimes, like, and learning to even hear those messages with each other. Like, I think a lot of us spend our lives turning off our intuition about whether something is safe or unsafe, because we had to do so many unsafe things to get by. We had to like sit in a classroom where teachers, you know, humiliated us or others in front of us, or we had to do jobs that were degrading, or, you know what I mean? Like, be with parents and siblings, you know, whatever. So it's very hard to kind of restore and get back. Like, how do I know if I want to do something or not? How do I know if it seems like the messages I'm getting from you are, you know, like accurate, like what you're saying matches what you're going to do, you know, like we're so bad at this that it feels like consent is kind of like very lost in our society.
And I also think part of what you're saying is it may be closer than it feels sometimes. That in these moments there is clarity, and there is a sense of like, oh no, I know what my values are here. I know what matters. I know how to trust myself. I think this is another quote from Emergent Strategy. Trust the people and the people rise to trust.
Yeah.
You know, I think that I want to, and I do believe that our ability to trust each other is closer than it feels. And that, you know, you mentioned earlier in the podcast, we have spent most of human history trusting each other outside of these hierarchical and exploitive, divisive systems. That is all very much a part of us and actively a part of us now.
Yeah, we evolved to share everything with each other so we could all survive, to like build connection. We are connective beings, and now we are in a wildly disconnected antisocial society, and we're all suffering miserably and blaming ourselves and each other. And it's like, I do like, you know, the research that says that like kids lose empathy when they're on their screens all the time, but if they go away to camp for 5 days with other kids and no phones, they all get empathy back. Like it's wired in, right? But it also is a big deal, the wounds that kind of make some of these things inaccessible. So it's like how to both have faith in like the goodness of ourselves and others, and recognize the gaps between how I'm currently behaving and what amount of awareness I currently have and what I might need to like show up for you guys the way that I want to and be part of our group in a way that would like really be good. Like being willing to kind of inventory some of what's happening for me that's not working, not in a way that's like I'm bad, but it's like, oh, I'm part of these bigger patterns. They're not me. They feel like they're mine. Mm-hmm. I want to keep untangling them. I want to be like, that's not my value. And also patient with myself when it comes up again, you know, talk to my friends. They're struggling with it too. I feel comfortable getting some feedback about it from them. You know, like that is the process, and like not being so afraid of it to not look at it, you know?
And I want to add that with your book, and one of the things I loved about it was you kept this all feeling fun and sexy and like things we want to do with each other. Like not, I know how heady these ideas can sound.
I feel like there's not a single finger wagging moment in the book. Like it's very affirming, I think. It's
what I need to hear.
Yeah.
I need, you know what I mean? It's like, I am a shame monster. And so this book is the things that I need to tell myself in order to keep doing this work. Like you're just like everyone else. You're not the best person. You're not the worst person. All of that stuff, you know, like it seems hard now. You're revisiting the wound, and also that's okay. Everyone's revisiting the hand they were dealt, you know?
Right. And that this is in a way, this is the business of life and certainly of the movement. And there's like a lot of joy and discovery and curiosity and, I don't know, excitement in it.
One question I have to ask you, because I wonder if you see this. One thing I wonder about is whether there are people who do more internalizing, like when things are hard, they're like, it's my fault. And those people read self-help books more and go to therapy more and are disproportionately women is also one of the questions I have. And like, there's also people who are more trained. We all do both, but more trained to be like, if things are hard, like it's other people's fault. I'm blaming others, and less likely to go to therapy or use the self-help book. And like what we do with the complexity of because one of the things I worry about is like, just some people trying so hard to change the dynamics on only one side. And you can change a lot of a dynamic by changing what you do. And absolutely. But I kind of hold that tension a lot about, internalizers and externalizers. Maybe that's too simplistic, but I was just curious what you see in that.
I think that you're onto something. I mean, if I'm just being honest, kind of anecdotally, I think that it's true that people who are drawn to therapy and self-help and often like movement work, and are people who are more inclined to say, like, what am I doing wrong or right? And how can I change that to improve what's happening around me and in the world? And one of the things that I really like about how you talk about relationships in this book is it's like about the quality of the experience of the relationship and of your experience inside of it. And I think that is something that people are universally drawn to understand. People want to have good relationships. And whether or not you're someone who tends to externalize or internalize blame, I think both and all types of people can recognize when they're having the same relationship over and over again and not wanting to do that anymore.
What I was going to say, like I'm in community with a fair amount of men and like cis men, and it's definitely true that we're like probably socialized to externalize things more and to be like, you know, if I don't feel good, that's somebody else's fault. That's my partner's fault or something like that. But you can only do that so many times until you start to be like, well, you know, I'm the common denominator here, right? It's always the other person's fault. And I think most of the men that I've like talked to about this book, for instance, or on these topics will often, you know, have kind of moved through that and been like, yeah, I recognize that like, this is, you know, something about me. There's work for me to do inside of this context. So I'm hopeful about it.
Yeah. Becoming middle-aged, I feel a lot of empathy for people who are going out and relating for the first times.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's a lot easier when you've had lots of relationships begin and end. And then when you begin relationships, you're like, yeah, this may end. And there's a kind of like a little bit of sobriety in there.
I've seen this
like
pattern
flexibility.
before. Yeah.
It's hard when I just have a lot of feeling for my friends who are in their teens and 20s, and maybe it can feel so consequential. I don't know. I just think like it may not be. I may be overgeneralizing, but I do notice that amongst my friends, like there's some kind of like you're saying, like you've seen the pattern several times, and you're like, maybe, you know.
It is really interesting that you said that you wrote this book with younger audiences in mind. That hadn't occurred to me at all, and I do think that it is very gratifying for young people to have those like social, societal fucked up things acknowledged.
Yes, like the romance myth.
like
Like that
it's-
has teenagers are fed that nonstop.
Yeah, and it's such a big deal to be able to, as an adolescent person, I think, like, accept or like be like come to understand that like everybody else isn't right.
Yeah.
Like nobody's in charge. Shit out there is completely fucked up, and so your bad feelings and difficult feelings are going to be like sometimes a byproduct of that or related to it. And you don't have to just be.
And you don't have to want what they want, and you don't have, you know. I think as a teenage feminist, I saw that. I was like, I'm being told what to desire and what to believe I should be like, and I don't have to be. And I think that a lot of that is in my critique of the romance myth.
I really love the framing of middle age as being a place of resilience around change in relationships. And I think as someone who has experienced, a fair amount of death here recently, and the end of relationships and big changes in relationships, it's easy for me to just see that as hard, and to imagine that all change is bad, and that like now I'm just in this period in my life where like more bad things are going to happen, and I just have to try and figure out how to evolve and not hold on too tight or whatever. And I appreciate that reframe. That in fact, like there's a real advantage to being at a place in your life where you do know that all relationships end in some way, and you do know that that loving is really difficult, and you have experienced that in a lot of ways and continue to seek to experience it. That's very helpful. I just turned 45, so thank you.
Oh, you're just making it through the midlife transits, the astrological transits, which are really about this. I mean, they're very interesting to study.
I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
Big time, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that on the other side of them, I'm 47, I think it can be, it's like you have instability. They stir up, midlife crisis transits are stir up instability. And if you're like normal, model of whatever straight normal thing is supposed to be in the US, that's like, you're supposed to like, be a man who gets a Camaro and a teenage girlfriend. But if you're like somebody who cares about liberation and your life is weird, it can be like, oh, how much weirder am I allowed to be?
Right.
And how can I ride instability to feel the edges of my liberation? And it's painful and difficult, but like there's something about becoming more yourself and having like maybe a firmer base to stand on.
And deepening into that, like those values, those eccentricities, those ways of living that haven't always been reinforced, but now through time actually work for you.
Yeah, giving less fucks. I mean, that's what the really old people say happens.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah. Maybe we all get there.
Well, speaking of giving less fucks, we should not give a fuck about the time or the length of this podcast, but we should probably wrap up. Do you have any last questions that you want to ask Sarah, or should I ask my last question?
No, go ahead, Alex. Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious. Up top, you said that this was actually more than one book, and you had to break it apart. So I'm curious, what is like the next part? What's chapter 2 going to be?
The next part is actually more of the stuff that I've been doing more publicly for a long time. It's, it's called Getting Shit Done in a Fucked Up World so far. And it's just a lot about like working in groups, like that piece of that, which I do tons of like workshops on. And a lot of the second half of my mutual aid book is about this, but just going way deeper, like perfectionism, overwork, work avoidance, like all the stuff that happens when we campaign against one another, conflict stuff, like just what it's like to work why we have to work in groups, why like groups are the only thing we have to work collectively. And then kind of what it's like and how to get through some of the really common obstacles. And again, just the same kind of thing, like identifying like typical patterns and being like, this is all totally normal and acceptable. And here's some ways that we can try to like be more values aligned in our practice.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Maybe less sexy than
exactly. Well, that's why I put this one out first. But then I was like, maybe I just should put that one out first because people are ready for it.
No, I think they are.
People are really ready.
We need it all.
Yeah, years ago it was hard to get people to have these conversations. They'd just be like, "We're back. We just need to get back to getting the thing out. We don't want to talk about what's going on in the group." And now I think more people than ever. I think partly from some of the encampment movement stuff that happened in 2020, even things in Occupy. More people are like, "Oh, what we do in here affects everything out there."
Yeah, well, and that's back to that lived experience. Once you've been through it and Occupy, and then you've been through it in 2020, and like, you see the patterns.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. Thanks for this work, Dean.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the book. It's just a fantastic resource. Definitely like go out and get it, everybody who's listening. And thank you for listening to Mistakes Were Made. And you should give us a rating too. This is my new drum that I want to beat. If you like this podcast and you're still listening after an hour and 18 minutes, then go onto your platform of choice and give us some stars. Thanks again, Dean.
Thanks, Dean.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.